with now what is known in Kenya as secession politics and what has been happening. But I'd like us to just start, first of all, with building a background before I come to you, gentlemen, and start with the definition of secession. When we have leaders talking about secession and certain county governments pulling out of certain jurisdictions and having their own state, as it were, what are we talking about? Now, secession, by definition, as you can see on your screen, is the action of withdrawing formally from membership of a federation or body, especially a political state. And for instance, if we'd use a current example, we have Catalonia that is currently in the process of trying to get itself out of the jurisdiction of Spain. We can look at several examples that have taken place in Africa. And in Africa, we have in 1960, Katanga declared independence from DRC, and UN crushed it. In 1967 to 1970, Biafra seceded from Nigeria's attempts. And also in 1993, we have Eritrea seceding from Ethiopia through UN referendum. And also we had secession attempts in South Africa. South Sudan also, from South Sudan in 9th July through a referendum. So that's basically secession in Africa. It's not just in Africa where we have had this secession attempts. We can also look at the United States. And from 1860 to 1861, we had U.S. slave state withdraw from the Union. These are just examples that we are looking at. And Alabama and Georgia and Louisiana followed in January, February 1st, 1961. Texas voted to secede, and we can continue. But elsewhere, we have on August 25th, 1830, Belgium seceding from Netherlands, and we also have Bosnia, and we can continue with many examples. But the question, of course, being whether this is one, uncalled for in Kenya, and secondly, whether the timing is right, and whether the leaders of those areas calling for secession have the heart of the people, the interest of the people, or it is more a political move. Let me start with you, Titus, on that.
No, one thing is that nothing is wrong if people want to secede. There's no problem. The only thing that needs to be done, I think, and Wakili is here, is that if it is allowed within the Constitution, if the Constitution stipulates even the procedure to be followed, and everyone follows the same procedure, then I don't see any problem. The only problem is that when people opt to follow that which is not enshrined into our Constitution, then it can even become a security concern. Mm-hmm. But if somebody outside there, remember, we live in a country or in a world where everybody has got a right to opinion. What each and every individual may not have is a right to be taken seriously. And I think all those people who are talking the way they are talking, they are just exercising their right to opinion. Right. And what they don't have is a right to be taken seriously.
Kefa, your comments on that, especially now from a legal perspective, where in the Constitution does that fall in?
Thank you. Maybe to start from, I will say that secession is not an issue that started the other day. It has been a discussion way back. I think you remember by the time the MRC even addressed that issue around 3 years back, when they felt like they're not part of Kenya anymore, because there are so many underlying issues that provoke or that activate this act for people to do it. Now, Article 2, 5, and 6 of the Constitution allows, gives our nation or our laws, a primary basic to adopt international laws which allows for self-governance, which allow for self-determination from the people. Now, again, Article 3 of the Constitution tells you that where people feel they do not have a legitimate government, or they feel they do not have a legitimate state that they can belong to, they have an option of not obeying that, and they can start an organization of their own. So it is a process that is well accepted, both in the Constitution and the international laws. It's allowed. But the main thing is, what we need to ask ourselves is, what is it that is driving this? And can it be cured before we go to that level. Because I think this should be the last resort where we are going. You know, we love this country, everybody wants to be part of Kenya, but what is it that is pushing Kenyans so far that we feel that we now need to move outside this and start our nation? The question has always been the issue of, you know, historical injustice, inequitability. People feel like they are not involved in the government. Government is of a certain class and other people are not part of it. Okay. So Kenyans feel like for many years they've never been recognized. For many years they've lived in the country as strangers, you know, as refugees, and they feel now it is time that we also start a belonging that makes us feel as the people.
All right. Kilu, do you feel that this is uncalled for at this point in time, especially given the timing? Because timing is also of essence. We are at a time where we're talking about dialogue. The country is looking at how to resolve the just recently passed election or sham election, depending on which side you're looking at it from. The timing and whether it is uncalled for at this point in time.
Mike, the talks of secession in Kenya are simply talks about the consequences of calamity. Historically, secession has never worked. Secession led, as you have correctly mentioned, historically, to the Civil War in the United States of America. And the Civil War was even more catastrophic than the war for America's independence. Secession has led in Europe, especially parts of Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, to very many negative consequences. Secession in Africa has never worked. I can say that really on authority. We are seeing right now, even in the case, unfortunately, of South Sudan, a nation that is struggling internally, is torn in between. And where you call for secession, you are actually saying that we have been denied services by the national government. We have been denied livelihood. We are not part of that nation. We do not share the benefits of the same currency or economic privilege. We are completely denied, and therefore we can then talk about, let us start our own economic zone. Now, unfortunately, the way Kenya is developed, it's a development discussion. And from a security standpoint, when we look at it, it does lead to other problems. If you say, I want to secede, and then the question is, economically, are you capable of self-sustaining and self-governance and sustaining all your citizens? Currently, we just had the issue yesterday of the Senate passing the approval for funds to be released from National Treasury to the county governments. Those funds are just to pay the county government and for the county government to be able to do its job. And county governments are not functional from a financial perspective. I think we would be remiss if we were to lie to Kenyans that secession will work. The truth is secession cannot work from an economic standpoint, and we put the lives of our children and vulnerable families at risk by calling for secession, because what you're saying is we do not want to be part of a national government and we want to self-govern, but you don't have the resources. If you're talking about secession, in the case of Texas, Texas with its massive resources, Texas, the state is the size of Kenya, with its massive resources, had sufficient resources internally to cater for all the food and development of its people, yet still was unable to make a good case for itself. In the case of all the counties currently calling for secession, unfortunately, not even a single one of them is self-sustaining. Devolution has not worked yet to the stage of development, and we do hope it will in the future, where states, federal states, or in our case, the counties and the county governments can self-sustain. They're very heavily dependent on the national budget, and the national budget, again, has a very small portion that is allocated to each one of the counties. The question then begs that all the people who have now gained independence through a secession process in the future and who are now working on the other side, where are they going to be able to earn their living, earn their pay? You're talking about, instead of uniting, you know, President Moi had it right. At the end of it all, when we all got sad and we said, you know, he needs to go home, he was very simple. He said peace, love, and unity. That is what is going to sustain a strong Kenya. Peace, love. We need to begin to love one another, especially the political parties. So you cannot take a political discussion and then use the fulcrum of secession, because what happens is, in your mind and in my mind, we will interpret it in a different way. A political leader will interpret it differently. A religious leader will interpret secession differently. And somebody else on the ground may interpret it in a different way.
Okay.
But if we create the boundaries and the borders, we do create a security risk.
Okay, and I want us to hear from the leaders from the Coast region, because that was their hue and cry, that it's time for Coast to have their own, but let's listen into what they had to say.
Immediately, I want categorically say here today, if the government is tired of Nyanza, we are ready to go alone. We cannot force ourselves in a barricade which is not working. Let them declare. We have to redefine our relations with this government. But we are not going to force ourselves in a relationship where we are not benefiting. We are only being milked dry. We are Kenyans and we have a right to get our rightful share in this government. We are not pleading for it. We are demanding.
Zaidi ya miaka 25 Mpwani amepiga kura ya urais, lakini hakuna siku moja kura ile ilimpatia majibu ambayo anataka, na itaendelea hivyo.
All right, and that's what they had to say. And let me come to you, Tuta. And this sounds to me like it's a question of inclusion. It's a question of shared resources. What is it that would make them, as leaders, as from what Honorable Odege has said there, that the marriage is not working? What is it that exactly is not working? What marriage are we talking about?
Getonga, it will depend with the lenses that someone puts on. There are those
Can we put on Kenyan lenses and look at it from Kenya?
If someone puts on some different lenses from what Mheshimiwa has just talked about, to him he will look at Kenya that a marriage that is working. To others, it's a marriage that it is not working at all. And to them, it's a high time that everybody calls it a quit. And this is as a result of two things. One, real issues, and imagined issues. Imagined issues are as a result of perception. That look, the fact that, remember Kenya is, one thing for a fact is that we are made up of almost, including the Makonde, 43 ethnic communities. And each and every of the 43 ethnic community needs to be included into the government.
When we talk about that inclusion to government, it's not practical for us to have all 43 tribes represented by an individual there. When we talk about inclusion, what exactly do we mean?
The inclusion here, there is a perception that once we are not where the resources are being allocated authoritatively, we may not get. It also influences when and how we are going to get those resources. So the moment a community feels that they are not part and parcel of where the resources are being allocated authoritatively, they tend to develop a perception that they are not getting enough, even if when they are getting. They tend to have that perception. Secondly, remember we have 47 counties. And within these 47 counties, there is still the same problem. Even if you go today in the county, there are some communities who still feel that they are marginalized. So when we talk of withdrawing, should it also reflect the same into the counties? Because if you go to some places like, for instance, Migori, you realize that there is a community in Migori which feels that they are not part and parcel of the county government of Migori. You go to some other counties where we have some minority, they also feel the same. So should we, what we need to ask ourselves, can secession be the solution to all these perceptions that we have been having of our community being marginalized, or we need to strengthen the systems that are there, such that regardless of who is in the position of power, you will still get what you should get because you deserve it as a Kenyan.
All right. Kefa, is secession an advice that you would give? And again, has time not taught us that having your tribesman or your kinsman in that position does not necessarily trickle down to you as a Kenyan as a benefit?
Itonga, African politics, very funny. I think that is the biggest tragedy that has befallen on us Africans, the type of leadership we have, so that the economic and the government resources are used as a bait. And those who benefit from those development and those resources are those who are allied to the state and those who are allied to the government in power. So that other people look at our history right from independence. Look at selective areas in our countries, right from coast, northeastern, some parts of Nyanza. These are people who feel that right from independence, they've been sidelined, up to date. No serious development have taken place. Even if we now have the county, the devolved system of governance, you still even feel that even the amount that trickles down is not enough, because even when you are doing a budget for the counties, you ought to, be alive to so many factors that inform that. You ought to be alive to the standard of development in each county. But these are the counties that you look at the budget, still, the county that even get the least budget in priority. So the question of secession that these people think, and I tend to disagree with my colleague, that secession has worked. Look at the history of Catalonia, started by 4 people, and how they robbed it up and made it a big issue. It has worked, both in Europe and even in Africa. But what we need to realize as Kenyans, that it is not the first priority. It ought to be as a last resort. The first priority goes back to the governors. The president is the symbol of national unity. Chapter 10 requires that in appointments and in exercising of government duties and state structures, the national outlook must be taken into place. People feel that sometimes the government in place tends to favor its own people. So that appointments are only done to those who are allied to the state, promotion, development, which is supposed to be human rights, which is supposed to be the state right. Development, things like roads, things like social amenities done, those should not be, they should not be, some special request from the government. Those are rights to all citizens.
But so, isn't that why then we have elected leaders who are supposed to take care of those things on the ground? Whereas if they have failed, they project it back to the national government, which is why we have county governments now as we speak. Maybe just, isn't that the way it's meant to be? Isn't that the model that is supposed to be?
It's very true. I think in framing the 2010 now promulgated constitution, leaders actually envisaged a situation, Mike, where counties would gain freedom. And if you check carefully, there is no restriction and there's no limitation whatsoever on what a county can accomplish. Counties can tap into their own resources, generate their own revenue. To date, the very first devolution conference where all the governors came together was in 2013. In that particular conference, all the governors promised that they would provide land for industrial parks in their counties. To date, not a single county, maybe just one county, has actually allocated land for an industrial park. So how do you develop if you cannot even put together an industrial park for your people? So the question again begs, when county governments were given the mandate, those are actual governments, they were actually also empowered to be able to not only tap into their own resources, because it's their own counties, and the members of parliament who are elected to go to the National Assembly were elected to represent the people on the ground. So we see now a bit of a disconnect between people, as you've correctly said, who have failed to deliver the development promises and are now going back to say, we blame you, national government, for not giving us enough. Now, when devolution, the whole discussion came up, it was because we're trying to decentralize not only power, but also economic resources, and allow each county to develop its own freedom, tap into its own resources. And if we go to a place like Kilibasi in Kwale, you find that the place is very underdeveloped. Or if you go out to Guranze or Ndavaya, you'll find that there are some people in very deep places in our country who still don't know who the president is. They're not bothered about the president. They're interested in just their basic lifestyles. If you go up, I've just come back from traveling quite far, Kaptama in Elgon region, you find there's no piped water, yet that place has spring water of the highest quality. So those are things that really should be taken into consideration by county governments. I know there are attempts that are being made currently by private sector to try and redress some of those issues, but really the county governments need to take the lead. It should not be about waiting for national government to share out some of the generally collected resources. It should be true leadership and development leadership, taking authority and actually beginning to share out what is already in existence. In the case of many of our natural resources, you talked about Migori. If we look at even the Lake Victoria Basin, we have about 800 kilometers of completely untapped natural reserve in the form of Lake Victoria, the world's largest freshwater lake. If we look at the coastal region, it's 1,000 kilometers, 350 nautical miles of continental shelf that is completely untapped in terms of resources. Yet you'll find that the people are agitating for change and passionate about development. It is the leaders who are responsible, and that's leaders from both sides. I'm not saying that it's one side or another. Even in Central Province, we find that there are completely untapped resources. If we go to the northern region, our northern region is rich, but in different types of resources. Again, even if we were just to look at, forget about natural resources, people resources, we have the best brains and minds across the country, people who can come together. If you go to Israel, you'll find 4 young boys have started up a company and are making, within a year, the company is valued at $4 billion US. So we need to realign our thinking rather than starting to talk about, draw an absolute line. Let's build a wall between us and them. Because then we are breaking down the very fragile economic state of the country when we're already on a clear path to development.
All right, Tuta, is secession probably projecting failure of those county governments, and they want to blame it on the national government, whereas even the resources that they have, if we take, for instance, the coastal region, there is a lot of resources. There's the fisheries. You've got cashew nut production that basically has been dormant for God knows how long. Is it their failure that they're blaming on the national government? And the question would be, should they secede? Should they succeed in seceding? What difference will those counties have?
There is a concept that is usually used in the American language, whereby when something happens, you tend to rally people around the flag. So what some of these county governors are doing is just to rally their residents around them with the ideology that the situation that we are currently experiencing in our region is as a result of the fact that the national government is not able to give us what we should be getting. But Getonga, look at the history of this country. Remember, during the Kanu regime, people used to be told, and they used to be told in Swahili, that siasa mbaya maisha mabaya. And what was this siasa mbaya? It was that because you have not voted for the sitting regime, it is viewed as a siasa mbaya. And the result of that siasa mbaya is that you are being deprived of your right to development. Then as late as recently, 6 months ago, you could hear the politicians from both Jubilee and NASA going around the country telling Kenyans, vote for us so that you'll be in government. Vote for us so that you'll get a development. And this was just not a preserve of the presidential candidate, but it had also trickled down to the county governments and right to the constituency and to the MCAs that voting for a particular candidate ought to translate to development. So that if you don't vote for, suppose you don't vote for that particular candidate, it translates to underdevelopment in that particular region that you come from. And that is now the fear that most of the Kenyan citizens have. That is the fear of most of the county citizens have. That is the fear of most of the electorate at the constituency level, because they didn't vote in a particular way that they were required to vote. Now they have started panicking that because we did not vote in a particular way, it might trickle down. And the effect may be that we are not going to get the development. And one thing that they are forgetting to understand, that regardless of of how you voted, regardless of how you voted and how you did not vote, you have a right as a Kenyan, you have a right as a taxpayer to get all the services that are supposed to be offered.
Is there a genuine danger of those resources not trickling down because of the voting pattern? Is there a genuine concern? Or is that imagined? Is that what you're referring to as imagined?
Remember, we have a history. We have a history, just like Wakili said. So it is now the responsibility, whoever will be sworn in as the president of this country, whoever has taken over the mantle of running the county government, whoever has been elected as an MP, and whoever has been elected as the MCA, to do away with some of these myths.
All right, I'm going to ask you to pause right there, because that's another bone of contention I want us to look at, because you talk about whoever will take over the government. And of course, that's a question that, depending again on which side of the divide you are, you'll view it as a government that is in waiting to be sworn in, in. Others have viewed it as a government that is illegitimate. We actually have the opposition leader Raila Odinga saying that the only solution for Kenya right now is a caretaker government which will take care of us as we wait for what he terms as credible elections. Is that a solution? We're going to come back with that as we come back. And this is the time where we release KTN Home. For those of us watching on KTN Home, we say goodbye. And Life and Style is going to begin in just a few minutes. For those of us on KTN News, and if you'd like to continue this conversation, feel free to turn over to KTN News, and we continue after the break.
This is KTN News.
Bet and win with Superbet 247, Kenya's newest and biggest gaming site. To join, send accept to 29247 or dial *292# and win big. Terms and conditions apply.